Hilchos Temurah Perek Sheni, the laws of forbidden exchange of sacrifices, chapter 2. Yesterday we learned the core of Temurah. What is Temurah? Temurah means you have a sacrifice and you have another animal and you want to exchange the holy animal for the unholy animal. Instead of this animal being the sacrifice, you want that one to be the sacrifice. That's not allowed according to the Torah, and if you do so, both animals become holy. Today the Rambam addresses the language that you have to use, the type of exchange you have to employ in order for this forbidden exchange to take place. And the reason that it's so important to know that is because there is another type of exchange of a holy animal which is actually permitted. And that's when you have a korban, animal that was put aside for a sacrifice, and it gets a mum. It gets a blemish that invalidates it to be offered as a sacrifice. So what do we do then? We do what's called chilul or pidyon. These are two terms for transferring or redemption. Essentially, we redeem the animal from being holy, transfer its holiness onto mani or onto another animal, and you bring that animal as a sacrifice. But it's a very different type of exchange. One is trying to help the sacrifice, so to speak. You have a sacrifice with a blemish, you want to get it onto another animal so you can bring your sacrifice. The forbidden exchange is where you think just for personal reasons you want to exchange it from this one to that one, then Torah says that's forbidden. So we have to differentiate between those two types of exchanges. Therefore, says the Rambam halacha aleph, ha-temurah, the forbidden type of exchange, the temurah which we're dealing with, hu sheyoymar bal ha-karban al behema schulin sheyesh loi, that's when the owner of the sacrifice talks about the unholy animal which he has. So here we'll use this guy as the owner of the sacrifice. Here's the animal that's meant to be a sacrifice. Here's the animal that's chulin. It's just regular, it's unholy. The owner is talking about this unholy animal, and he says, Harei zu tachazu. This one, meaning the unholy one, should be instead of this one, meaning the sacrifice. Or Harei zu chalifas zu, or he uses a different Hebrew word, khalifa, which also means exchange. This one, again, the unholy one, should be instead of this one, the sacrifice. The ein tzarich leimar, needless to say, if he was even more explicit, im amar, if he said, Harei zu tachas chata zu. This one, the unholy one, should be instead of this sin offering. He actually labels it. Or instead of this burnt offering. Shehi Temurah, for sure, that classifies as forbidden exchange. V'cheinim amar, so too if the sacrifice wasn't in front of him. It was somewhere else. And he said, Harezu tachas chatas sheyesh li b'sei chabayis. This unholy animal will be instead of the sin offering that I have in my home. Oy tachas oila sheyesh li b'makom pleni. Or it'll be instead of the burnt offering that I have in somewhere, someplace. Harezu Temurah, that is also an effective forbidden exchange. V'hu sheyesh le, of course, provided that you have the sin offering in your house or the burnt offering in wherever that place might be. Avolim amar al behema schulin. But if all you said, you had an unholy animal, and you said about that animal, Harezu tachas oila, this should be instead of a burnt offering, Harezu tachas chatas, or this should be instead of a sin offering. You didn't label the sacrifice as well. You didn't say this animal or this sin offering or a specific sin offering. Lo amar klum. You've said nothing because there's no real exchange. You don't know which burnt offering or which sin offering you're referring to. V'cheinim amar, and so too if you said, and here comes the point I mentioned before in the introduction, Harezu mechuleles al zu. If you use the term chilul, which is typically used for transferring a holy animal that got blemished, and you said this one should be transferred to this one, eino temurah, that is not a forbidden type of exchange. And this leads us into a very similar discussion. Hayu lefanav shtei behemis. A person has in front of him two animals. Achas chulin, ve'achas hekter shenafal bamum. One is unholy, and one is a sacrificial animal that has a blemish and cannot be brought as a sacrifice anyway. So watch how a slight difference in motion could make all the difference in law. Hiniach yadei al behemas chulin. If the person here would put his hand on the chulin animal, the unholy animal, which means that whatever declaration he's about to make is pertaining to this animal. V'amar, and he says, Harei zu tachazu, I want this unholy animal to come in the place of the holy one, even though the holy one is a type of animal which needs to be redeemed anyways because it has a blemish, but you made your declaration relevant to the unholy animal, Harei zu temurah v'leika. You've done a temurah, a forbidden exchange, and you actually get lashes. Hiniach yadai al behemas hektish. But if you just put your hand, instead of on the unholy animal, you put it on the holy animal. Va'amar, and you said, Harezu tachazu, I want this holy animal to be instead of that one. In other words, I want to switch places, but you're going from the holy to the unholy. Hareze chilul al behemas achulin, you haven't done a forbidden exchange. All you've done is simply transferred the holiness of the holy animal to the unholy animal. Ve'ein zu temurah, that's not forbidden exchange. Ela kipaide ba'alas mum bezuha behema. It's like a classic case. You want to redeem an animal that has a blemish onto a different unholy animal so you can bring it as a sacrifice. Just where he put his hand makes all the difference. Halacha Gimel, here we come to a wonderful and powerful concept that addresses the core of a Jewish person and his attitude to doing mitzvahs. Listen to this. A person has in front of him 3 animals that are all meant to be offered on the altar, of which one of them happens to have a mum, which means it's not going to be offered, meaning that it's standing to be redeemed in the classic, regular, permitted way. And then he has he has 3 animals that are unholy and are unblemished and technically fit to be offered as sacrifices. The Amar, and the person says, Hare elu tachas elu. He's talking about the chulin animals. He says, I want these to be instead of these. So now, 2 of them are definitely Temurah, because 2 of the sacrifices were completely fit, and so were 2 of the chulin animals. Hare shtayim min achulin tachas shtayim atmimois Temurah san Temurah. 2 out of the chulin take the place of 2 of the sacrifices, and the Temurah is effective. It's a forbidden exchange, and therefore you get 2 sets of lashes. But the 3rd animal, which is chulin, he tachas balas mum we put it in the place of the blemished animal, and we say that it was transferred in a kosher way. He wanted to do chilul, not Temurah. He wanted to do permitted transferring, not the forbidden exchange. Why? Why do we say that was his intent? He just did 2 Temurahs. Why would we say that this one also meant any different? Says the Rambam, listen to this rule about Jewish people. Since in front of the Jew, he has a path of prohibition, Temurah, but at least for this one animal, he has a permissible way to do the exchange. The chilul way, it is a presumption, that a person will not leave a permitted option and purposely adopt a forbidden option. If all he has is something forbidden, okay, a Jew might do something forbidden. But if you have both options equally in front of you, you could do it in a kosher way, you could do it in a non-kosher way, a Jew would never pick the non-kosher way, he'd always pick the kosher way. So 2 of them we can't get away from. That's for sure Temurah. But the 3rd one will say he meant to do chilul, not Temurah. Therefore he doesn't get 3 sets of lashes, only 2. It goes even further, says the Rambam. So too if he would have said, same idea, just not 3 against 3, 10 against 10. Eser behemais elu, tachas eser behemais elu. He had 10 sacrificial animals, one of which had a mum, 10 chulin animals, all unblemished. And he says these 10 animals are instead of those 10 animals, va'achas mehen balas mum, one of the holy animals has a blemish. We say the same thing. He only gets 9 lashes, not 10. The 10th animal will say he wanted to do it in a permitted exchange way, chilul, not Temurah. Now, why is this a novelty? If you have 3 animals, why should 10 animals be different? The answer is because in this case, in Jewish law we have what's called a chazakah. 3 times is considered an established reality. So in the first case, you only did 2 problematic things. You never got to 3. So the 3rd one will say it was in a kosher way. But in this case, you have 10 animals. That means you already passed 3 where you did it in a forbidden way. You already have a chazakah of doing things a forbidden way. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, we will always try to redeem the Jewish character. Even though this person already established a reality of him getting multiple sets of lashes, more than 3, since at the 10th one, there's a path of permissibility, he wouldn't leave the permissibility and purposely do the prohibition, he probably meant the permitted way. Another case, says the Rambam, 2 and 2. A little bit different. The 2 holy animals, one of them has a mum. That's kind of like last time. Here, the 2 chulin animals also, one of them has a mum. Says the Rambam, the Amar, if a person says, Hare elu tachas elu, these ones go for these ones, same principle. Hare atmima tmuras atmima. So the 2 unblemished ones are a forbidden exchange. V'leika achas, and he gets 1 set of lashes. Ubalas mum michuleles al balas hamum. And the one with the blemish is transferred to the other chulin with the blemish. Even though you could say over here you accomplish nothing. Right? If you have a blemished holy animal and you're moving it to a blemished unholy animal, it's still blemished. It's like I'm bringing it as a sacrifice. So maybe the person over here meant for a prohibited exchange, for the blemished one to be instead of this one and this one instead of that one. No. We're always going to find the loophole. We're always going to find the way out. A Jew will never leave permissibility and purposely do a prohibited act. If somebody says, interesting formulation of words. Usually we say you have 1 sacrifice and you're trying to put the unholy one in place of the 1 sacrifice. What if he mentions 2 sacrifices? I want this unholy animal to be instead of a burnt offering and a peace offering. Sounds nonsensical. How could you have 1 instead of 2? Says the Rambam, we make it happen. Dvarav kayamim, his words are lasting, they are effective. V'timacher, and what you do is you sell the unholy animal. It becomes holy, you sell it. V'yavi b'chatzi dameha tmuras oilo, b'chatzi dameha tmuras shlamim. And with it, half the proceeds go to buying a burnt offering, half the proceeds go to buying a peace offering. Amar, but if a person says, he puts in an extra word, he says, Harezu tmuras oilo, utmuras shlamim, this should be an exchange for a burnt offering and an exchange for a peace offering. Sounds like you were trying to do two separate exchanges. So we have to find out what he meant. If that's what he intended to begin with, he wanted it to be for two things, dvarav kayamim, so his words are effective. We do the same thing. You sell it, you divide half the proceeds. But if really it's revealed that he was just correcting himself, initially he meant he wants to make it an exchange for a burnt offering. And then he retracted and he wants to say now it should be instead of a peace offering, even though he retracted. In the frame of time that's called toich kedei dibur, the time it takes to speak, which is a tiny amount, the time it takes to say 3 words, shalom alecha Rabbi, about 2 seconds. And usually, in most of Jewish law, that's the small window of time that you have to retract any deal or whatever, anything you want to retract. Over here, we don't let him retract. Ein taifsin ela lashon rishon. All we do is we take the first expression that he said. The first Temurah which he said, in this case the burnt offering, that's the one we follow. Then it's treated, this animal is treated only as an exchange of a burnt offering.